It was a quiet night, the kind where even the wind seems to tiptoe through the trees. The streets were empty, houses dark except for the occasional dim light glowing from behind curtains. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the distant wail of sirens. One after another, police vehicles started rolling down the narrow neighborhood road. Their headlights cut through the darkness like searchlights, scanning each home, each shadow. At the center of the commotion stood a house that looked ordinary, peaceful even, but inside, the owner sat calmly in his living room, completely unaware of the chaos outside. That man was Chuck Norris. He was sipping on a glass of water, reading quietly under the soft glow of a table lamp. The clock ticked past midnight, but the usual calm of the night was about to break. Outside, officers moved with precision. Their radios crackled softly, the only sound besides the occasional snap of boots on pavement. "This is the house," one whispered. Another officer adjusted his flashlight, shining it toward the windows, scanning the shadows inside. Nothing seemed suspicious yet. And yet, there was something about the house, the stillness, that made them uneasy. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed against the front door. Chuck looked up, calmly. He wasn't startled, not even slightly. Seconds later, more knocks came, faster this time. Lights from the patrol cars flashed against the windows, casting strange shadows across the walls. Neighbors stirred, drawn to the noise. From behind their curtains, some peeked through, phones ready to record what was happening. Inside, Chuck Norris stood. His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing the situation, but he remained silent. There was no panic, no rush. Just a calm, steady presence that seemed to fill the room. The officers outside exchanged uneasy glances, unaware of who was behind the door. They had no idea that they were standing outside the home of someone whose reputation alone could command respect, or fear. And then it happened. Chuck moved toward the door, slow, deliberate. Every eye outside the house seemed to follow him. Hearts pounded. Some officers whispered nervously into their radios. The tension was palpable. Why were they here? What were they expecting? And most importantly, who was this man they were about to confront, not knowing the legend behind the calm figure who now approached the front door? The night held its breath. The neighborhood, once silent and still, was now alive with tension. Streetlights flickered in the chilly night air, throwing long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns. The faint rustle of leaves in the wind seemed louder than ever, and every creak of a branch made the officers tense. Patrol cars lined the streets, their engines idling softly. Flashing blue and red lights reflected off windows, creating a chaotic dance of color against the quiet suburban houses. Inside the house, Chuck Norris moved with quiet precision. Every step was deliberate, controlled, and calm. He wasn't surprised, nor was he alarmed. To him, this was just another night, another unexpected situation that demanded patience, observation, and awareness. Sitting in the living room, he had first noticed the faint vibration of distant sirens. Then came the unmistakable rhythm of boots on his front porch. Finally, the knocks. Not rushed, not panicked, just firm and methodical. Chuck's home was simple yet elegant. A few framed photographs lined the walls, family memories, moments frozen in time. A comfortable leather sofa faced the TV, which remained off tonight. A soft rug covered the floor, muted in color, absorbing the faint echoes of approaching voices. The ambience was peaceful, calm, ordinary. And yet, the ordinary had been pierced by an extraordinary situation. Outside, the officers were a mixture of caution and confusion. Most were seasoned, trained for high-stakes operations, yet something about this house felt different. Their eyes scanned the windows, their radios crackled softly as whispers passed between them. "Are we sure this is the address?" one officer asked, voice low but tense. "Positive," replied another. "We double-checked." "This is it." Neighbors, curious and alarmed, had stepped cautiously onto their porches, some capturing the scene on their phones. Whispers traveled through the small crowd. "Who lives here? Why are so many cars here? Is it a robbery?" The combination of flashing lights, sirens, and the unknown resident created a sense of suspense that seemed to hang over the street like fog. Chuck finally reached the door, his hand brushing over the smooth wood. He paused, taking a measured breath. He didn't shout. He didn't draw attention. His eyes met the officer standing directly in front of him through the partially opened door. There was a brief moment of silent appraisal. Both sides were cautious, evaluating, sensing the tension, but unable to fully grasp what was about to unfold. The officer's body language betrayed a mix of nerves and respect they didn't yet understand. One adjusted his flashlight, trying to get a better look. Another gripped his radio tighter, unsure whether to call for backup. The crowd outside leaned forward, collectively holding their breath, cameras poised. Every person seemed aware that something significant was about to happen, even if they couldn't articulate why. Chuck's calmness was disarming. There was no flinch, no hint of fear, no agitation. He simply stood, a figure of quiet strength, waiting. And in that stillness, a story was being told without words, a story of experience, of awareness, of command over oneself even when surrounded by chaos. Minutes stretched like hours. The neighborhood, the officers, even the silent observers on the porches, were caught in a moment suspended in time. And in that space, Chuck Norris became more than a man behind a door. He was a presence, a force that demanded attention without uttering a single word. The scene was set. The players were in place. Every glance, every whisper, every cautious step added to the suspense. The midnight raid had begun, but the true story, the one everyone was waiting to see, was about to be revealed. The officers outside the house were tense, their movements deliberate yet cautious. Every shadow seemed alive, every flicker of light a potential threat. The night air was thick with anticipation, carrying the faint scent of wet asphalt and pine from nearby trees. Radios crackled softly as officers whispered updates to one another. "He's moving toward the door," one said. "Be ready," another replied, the words tight and measured. Chuck Norris, inside, took slow steps toward the front entrance. His posture was relaxed, his gaze steady, yet every inch of him exuded alertness. He wasn't just standing still. He was observing, calculating, preparing. His eyes scanned the faces of the approaching officers, reading hesitation and uncertainty in their movements. Every subtle shift, every micro-expression told him more than any words ever could. Outside, officers were unsure how to act. They had come prepared for a routine raid, following what they believed was credible intelligence. But something felt off. The resident wasn't panicking. There were no signs of threat, no sudden movements, no frantic gestures. Instead, the man inside the house was calm, almost serene, and that calm unsettled them more than any aggression could. The first officer raised his hand, signaling for the others to hold. "Wait, are we sure this is the right house?" he asked, a hint of doubt creeping into his voice. His partner whispered back, "We verified the address. This is it. Keep your positions." Despite their confidence, uncertainty hung in the air, a palpable tension that made even the youngest recruit hesitate. Neighbors gathered quietly on the edges of the street, watching intently. Phones glowed as people recorded the unfolding scene, their breaths caught between curiosity and anxiety. "Who is that?" someone whispered. Another voice murmured, "Why is he so calm?" The crowd could feel it. Something extraordinary was happening, though they couldn't put their finger on what. Chuck's hand rested on the doorknob for a moment. Then he turned his head slightly, noticing a shadow at the edge of the porch, a neighbor trying to get a better view. His eyes softened briefly, acknowledging the concern and curiosity without a single word. Then, just as slowly, he turned back to face the officers. The officers exchanged glances. They moved closer, but the hesitation remained. Each step was careful, almost reverent. They whispered among themselves, unsure of what to expect next. The usual confidence of law enforcement seemed to falter under the weight of this calm, composed man standing behind the door. The night had become a delicate balance of caution and curiosity. Inside, Chuck's presence dominated the room. The silence between him and the officers was louder than any shouted commands. Every subtle motion, his shifting weight, the faint tilt of his head, the steady calm in his eyes, added to the suspense. It was a silent dialogue, a test of perception, patience, and understanding. Minutes stretched, and with each passing moment, the tension grew. The officers whispered urgently into their radios, unsure if backup was needed. Neighbors leaned forward, cameras raised, caught between fascination and disbelief. Everyone was waiting, some for action, some for conflict, some for explanation, but no one could predict what would happen next. Chuck's calmness was disarming. The air seemed to thrum with anticipation, as if the night itself was holding its breath. And in that moment, everyone understood. The story about to unfold wouldn't be loud or chaotic. It would be subtle, precise, and unforgettable, a demonstration of power, patience, and presence that didn't need violence to command attention. The stage was set. The audience, officers, neighbors, and even the unseen world beyond, was watching. The tension had reached its peak. And behind the door, Chuck Norris prepared to reveal exactly why this night would be remembered long after the sirens faded. Outside Chuck Norris' house, the atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as a routine police operation now felt like a scene suspended in time. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off windows, casting surreal patterns across the quiet street. The night air was tense, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of sirens. Every officer, neighbor, and bystander seemed acutely aware that something extraordinary was unfolding, but no one yet understood what. Officers crouched behind their vehicles, flashlights trembling slightly in their hands. Each movement was careful, almost cautious, as if disturbing the delicate balance of the night might trigger the unknown. The young recruits tried to maintain composure, but every instinct screamed alert. Whispers ran through the ranks. "Is he armed? Does he know we're here? Why hasn't he reacted aggressively?" Even the veterans felt a flicker of unease. The calmness of the man behind the door was disarming, almost surreal. Neighbors had gathered silently along the edges of the street, drawn by curiosity and concern. Phones glowed in the darkness as people recorded the unfolding scene, some holding their breath, others exchanging incredulous looks. "Who is that?" murmured one. "Why isn't he panicking?" asked another. Conversations were hushed, as though speaking too loudly might break the spell. Children peeked from behind curtains, while adults leaned forward, fascinated by the tension. Every eye was fixed on the front door, every camera capturing the same slow, deliberate moment. Inside, Chuck Norris stood in complete control. His movements were minimal yet precise, a quiet command of the room and the moment. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture aggressively. Instead, he radiated a presence that seemed to affect everyone around him. The officers outside felt it, even without knowing who he truly was. Their trained instincts conflicted with the unusual calm before them, creating a subtle but undeniable tension. As he reached for the door, a hush seemed to settle over the crowd. The night felt charged, as if time itself had slowed. Officers glanced at each other, exchanging silent messages through raised eyebrows and subtle nods. Their radios crackled with low whispers, but no one dared to call for immediate action. The situation didn't feel threatening, yet the unknown was more powerful than any perceived danger. Neighbors in the front row of the growing crowd leaned forward. Some whispered theories. Maybe it's a mix-up? Perhaps a suspect escaped inside? Or could this man be someone important? Phones tilted higher, recording every detail. The slow approach to the door, the measured steps, the calmness that seemed to command the night. Even the distant streetlights seemed to bend attention toward the house, illuminating every shadow and creating a dramatic stage for what was about to unfold. Every subtle gesture inside the house was magnified outside. Chuck paused, his hand brushing the doorknob, eyes scanning the officers. The silent dialogue between him and the officers was visible to everyone watching. Respect met confusion, calm met tension, patience met curiosity. People could feel the gravity of the moment without any words spoken. Even the trained law enforcement officers seemed momentarily disarmed, caught in a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Minutes stretched, and the tension grew thicker with each passing heartbeat. Neighbors whispered quietly, some gasping softly when they noticed the officers' hesitations. Others nudged each other, eyes wide, as if afraid to blink and miss something pivotal. The entire street had become an audience, captivated by a drama that was unfolding slowly, deliberately, and with a quiet intensity that words could not capture. Everywhere, reactions amplified the suspense. Heads tilted, whispers increased, phones clicked, and eyes stayed glued to the front door. Even from a distance, the electricity of the moment was palpable. The officer's uncertainty, the neighbor's fascination, and the mysterious calm of Chuck Norris combined to create an atmosphere charged with anticipation. Everyone watching instinctively knew that the next moment would reveal something extraordinary, something they wouldn't forget. And in the stillness, a shared thought lingered in the minds of every witness. Who was this man, and what would happen the moment the door finally opened? The night held its breath, waiting for the revelation that would turn curiosity into awe. The tension had reached a near unbearable peak. Every officer outside the house had frozen in place, flashlights trembling slightly, hearts pounding with anticipation. Neighbors leaned forward on tiptoes, phones raised, as if the very air outside Chuck Norris' home was holding its breath. The night had transformed into something cinematic, a slow, suspense-filled scene where everyone waited for the first act to end and the truth to reveal itself. Inside, Chuck Norris stood in perfect calm. His hand rested lightly on the doorknob, his eyes meeting those of the officers just beyond the threshold. There was no aggression, no panic, only a steady, unwavering presence. He didn't need to raise his voice or demand attention. The aura of experience and composure filled the room. The officers, trained for high-pressure situations, found themselves momentarily disarmed. They had prepared for confrontation, for chaos, for resistance, but this was none of those things. Then, as slowly as the sirens had begun, the realization hit. One of the younger officers, eyes wide, whispered into his radio, "Wait, we've made a mistake. This isn't the address." The words barely left his lips before the room seemed to shift. Confusion replaced tension. Doubt replaced certainty. The officers glanced at each other, their earlier confidence slipping through their fingers. They had been poised for action, and now it was clear that they were on the wrong doorstep. Chuck Norris, ever observant, didn't need confirmation. He had sensed it from the moment they arrived. The uncertainty, the hesitations, the micro-expressions of doubt, the subtle misalignment of their movements. And now, the misunderstanding was revealed without any need for confrontation. Slowly, he opened the door fully, stepping into the porch light with the calm of someone entirely in control of his environment. The officers instinctively straightened, eyes locked on him, unsure of how to respond. And then came the pause, the silent moment when everyone, officers and neighbors alike, processed the truth. The man they had been surrounding, prepared for a raid, was not a criminal or threat at all. He was someone else entirely. The first officer to speak, a seasoned veteran, swallowed hard and said, almost in disbelief, "You're Chuck Norris." The name hung in the night air, heavier than any siren or flash of light. The officers looked around at each other, realization dawning. Their carefully planned midnight raid had accidentally targeted the home of a legend. Not just any man, but Chuck Norris, a figure whose reputation alone could command respect and, in some cases, fear. Chuck gave a subtle, knowing smile. There was no anger, no judgment, only calm acknowledgement. "It's all right," he said evenly, his voice steady, quiet, and commanding at the same time. "It looks like there's been a mistake." His calm demeanor was so powerful that it seemed to still the night itself. The officers, previously tense and ready for confrontation, now felt relief and, strangely, admiration. The neighbors, watching from the street, gasped collectively. Phones clicked, capturing every second of the revelation. The legend they had heard about, seen in movies and stories, was standing in front of them, calm, composed, and entirely human. Yet, his presence was extraordinary. The night had been a crescendo of tension, and the truth now released it in waves of awe and fascination. One officer, trying to regain composure, chuckled nervously. "Well, that explains the hesitation," he admitted, glancing at his colleagues. Another nodded, shaking his head with disbelief. The realization spread through the street like wildfire. A routine operation had collided with legend, and the calmness of Chuck Norris had turned what could have been chaos into a remarkable lesson in patience, composure, and respect. Even in this moment of revelation, Chuck remained entirely unflustered. He spoke briefly with the officers, clarifying the mix-up, offering guidance, and ensuring that no one left embarrassed or upset. His words were concise, measured, and polite, every phrase carefully chosen, yet naturally authoritative. The officers left the porch not with resentment or frustration, but with admiration and a newfound understanding of the power of calm presence. As the sirens faded and the patrol cars drove away, the neighbors remained on their porches, staring at the quiet house. The night had returned to stillness, but the impact of what had happened lingered. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. It was a story of quiet authority, of power exercised through patience and composure, and of the respect earned by simply being oneself. And so, the midnight raid concluded, not with drama, conflict, or violence, but with a revelation so unexpected and powerful that everyone involved, from officers to neighbors, would remember it for years to come. Chuck Norris didn't raise his voice, didn't fight, and didn't need to prove anything. He simply was. The story of that night spread quietly at first, whispered among the neighbors, then shared online. It wasn't the raid itself that made the memory unforgettable. It was the calm, composed, almost otherworldly presence of a man who could command an entire street without uttering a threat. The events of that night weren't just an extraordinary story, they were a powerful lesson in presence, patience, and the quiet influence that true strength can have. As the patrol cars drove away and the last neighbors returned to their homes, the neighborhood was enveloped in a calm that felt almost sacred. The sirens faded, the flashing lights disappeared, and yet the memory of what had occurred remained vivid in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Chuck Norris had not raised his voice, nor had he threatened anyone. He had not shouted commands or wielded intimidation. Yet, in every subtle movement, in every calm glance, he had conveyed a presence so commanding that the entire situation had transformed before the eyes of the officers and neighbors alike. There was a lesson here, one that transcended the story itself. True influence and authority do not need to be loud, aggressive, or forced. They come from composure, awareness, and integrity. For the officers, the lesson was immediate and humbling. They had arrived with the expectation of confrontation, prepared for tension, armed for resistance. They had anticipated a struggle, yet they encountered a calm, collected man who did not need to prove himself. Their training had taught them to act decisively, but in this case, decisiveness met wisdom. Chuck's quiet presence, his measured patience, and his calm acknowledgement of the mistake had shifted the entire dynamic. He had taught them, without words, that power is not about aggression, it is about self-control and awareness. For the neighbors, the lesson was equally striking. In a world where stories of conflict often dominate, where chaos grabs attention more than calm, they had witnessed a man command respect not through force but through poise. Their phones captured the scene, their whispers carried through the street, and yet the memory that would endure was not the flashing lights or the approaching patrol cars. It was the composed figure standing calmly in his doorway, handling the unexpected with grace and dignity. The story also speaks to us on a more personal level. Life is full of unexpected situations, moments where tension, fear, or uncertainty can overwhelm us. Often, the natural instinct is to react loudly, to push forward with force, or to assert control in ways that may escalate conflict. But the example of Chuck Norris that night illustrates a different path. To remain calm, to assess the situation with clarity, to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. In doing so, one can transform potential conflict into understanding, tension into resolution, and fear into respect. There is another subtle lesson embedded in the story: awareness. Chuck had recognized, almost instinctively, that something was off the moment the officers arrived. He observed their movements, their subtle hesitation, and the micro-expressions that hinted at confusion. By being fully present and aware, he avoided unnecessary escalation. Awareness, paired with calm, is a form of power that commands more attention and respect than any loud confrontation could. Humility is also part of the takeaway. Even after the revelation, after it became clear that the raid had been a mistake, Chuck did not flaunt his identity or demand admiration. He simply acknowledged the situation with grace, clarified the misunderstanding, and allowed the officers to leave with dignity intact. In doing so, he demonstrated that true strength does not need recognition. It manifests in the ability to act rightly, calmly, and with integrity regardless of who is watching. Finally, the night reminds us of the enduring impact of presence. The officers and neighbors left with a memory that would linger, a story they would tell for years. The moment was not about conflict, it was about observation, reflection, and respect. It showed that one person, by embodying calmness, wisdom, and awareness, can influence the actions, perceptions, and emotions of everyone around them without force, threat, or even words. In a world obsessed with drama, spectacle, and constant noise, this story serves as a reminder. The quietest moments can have the greatest impact. True leadership, true influence, and true power often lie not in volume, not in aggression, but in patience, composure, and wisdom. Chuck Norris had taught this lesson without a single raised voice, without a confrontation, and without seeking credit. As the night drew to a close, the street returned to its stillness. But in the minds of those who witnessed it, a lesson had been etched deeply. Calm presence commands attention, Awareness prevents unnecessary conflict, and humility amplifies the respect one receives. Power, when wielded wisely and quietly, transforms not just situations but the people involved. And sometimes, the greatest lessons are learned not in chaos, but in the moments of unexpected stillness that force everyone to pause, reflect, and understand. As the first hints of dawn began to touch the sky, the quiet of the neighborhood returned. The flashing blue and red lights from the patrol cars had disappeared, leaving the streets bathed in soft, pale light. The tension of the night seemed almost surreal now, as if it had only existed in the imaginations of those who had witnessed it. But everyone knew that what had occurred would not be forgotten. The officers who had approached Chuck Norris' home left in a mix of relief, awe, and reflection. They had come expecting confrontation, tension, and perhaps resistance. They left with a story, a lesson in calm authority and presence that no amount of training could replicate. Their understanding of strength had expanded, subtly yet profoundly, and they would carry this experience with them for years to come. The neighbors lingered on their porches and sidewalks, talking in hushed tones. Phones remained in hands, not out of fear but out of fascination, as people replayed what they had seen in their minds. "Did you notice how calm he was?" one whispered. "It's like he wasn't even surprised," said another. Their voices carried a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Some tried to piece together the story, imagining what it must have been like inside that quiet house. Others simply reflected on the patience and composure displayed, realizing that sometimes the greatest moments aren't loud, they're subtle, powerful, and unforgettable. The story quickly spread, first in whispers between neighbors, then across social media, as someone posted a video snippet they had recorded. Viewers far and wide were captivated not by a dramatic confrontation, but by the subtle mastery of presence, awareness, and humility. Comments flooded in, people discussing the power of calm in tense situations, reflecting on personal experiences where patience and observation could have altered outcomes. The tale of the midnight raid became a conversation about life, decision-making, and human behavior. At its core, the story invites reflection. What would you have done in that situation? Would you have panicked, raised your voice, or made assumptions? Or would you have observed, measured your response, and stayed calm, just as Chuck did? The story becomes more than an anecdote about a famous figure. It becomes a mirror, challenging each of us to consider how we handle tension, uncertainty, and unexpected challenges in our own lives. For content creators, storytellers, and educators, the lesson is clear. Engagement doesn't always come from drama. It comes from relatability, suspense, and meaningful reflection. Chuck's calm, composed response captured attention not through theatrics, but through authenticity. He didn't have to prove anything. He simply embodied the values of patience, wisdom, and presence. And in doing so, he captivated an audience, inspired discussion, and left a lasting impact. Viewers are naturally drawn to stories that make them think, that encourage empathy, and that inspire self-reflection. The Midnight Raid serves all three purposes. It shows a moment of tension transformed into understanding. It reminds us that the loudest reactions are not always the most powerful, and that true influence comes from inner strength rather than external force. The narrative rewards curiosity by slowly building suspense, leading to a reveal that is satisfying, insightful, and meaningful rather than sensationalized. To engage viewers effectively, creators can invite participation. Questions like, "What would you have done if you were in the officer's shoes?" Or, "Have you ever witnessed someone handle tension with complete calm?" encourage audience reflection and comment interaction. Asking viewers to share their own stories or lessons learned makes them a part of the narrative, transforming passive watching into active engagement. For those reflecting personally, there's a deeper takeaway. Life constantly places us in moments of unpredictability. From workplace challenges to family disagreements, from unexpected crises to everyday stress, the same principles apply. Pause, observe, respond thoughtfully, and maintain composure. The story of Chuck Norris' Midnight Encounter isn't just about legend or fame, it's about the power of awareness, patience, and integrity in the face of uncertainty. As the morning progressed, the quiet neighborhood returned to normal. But the impact of that night lingered in the minds of everyone involved. The officers, the neighbors, the social media viewers, they had all witnessed something extraordinary. Not an explosion, not a fight, not a dramatic confrontation, but a subtle display of human mastery, calmness in the face of tension, humility in the face of misunderstanding, and strength that did not need to assert itself aggressively to be recognized. So, for viewers watching this story, the question remains, how can we apply these lessons in our own lives? How can calmness, awareness, and humility help us navigate tense situations? What small but deliberate actions can turn potential conflict into understanding? Take a moment to reflect. Think about your own experiences and how a measured, composed response might have changed the outcome. And now, it's your turn to join the conversation. Comment below and share your thoughts. Did Chuck Norris' calm reaction inspire you? Have you ever faced a situation where patience and composure made all the difference? If you believe that wisdom, calmness, and presence are more powerful than noise or force, type calm in the comments. Share this story with someone who could benefit from a reminder that strength comes in many forms, not all of them loud, and not all of them visible. Because in the end, stories like this don't just entertain. They inspire, they teach, and they remind us of the timeless power of patience, awareness, and quiet authority. And that is why the midnight raid on Chuck Norris' home will be remembered, not for the flashing lights or the sirens, but for the lesson it silently, yet profoundly, delivered.